My problem wasn't the cancer, it was the aloneness. And if I long for anything in my life, it's connection. I'm trained as a psychologist, and I've done 2 master's degrees and a doctorate. And in all of my training, telling your own story is like a big no-no. The whole purpose of this is hopefully to help other people feel less alone in these complicated moments in our lives, where we all let go of all of that fear and bullshit and just exist together as our most authentic, flawed, gorgeous, fucked up selves. When we can be ourselves, we have the best and most perfect chance at connection. I'm Sarah Schmidt, and this is Wholey Schmidt, Season 1. Hi there. It's our first official episode, and I'm so excited to share this with you. Today, we're going to talk about 2 themes. We're going to talk about parentification and perfectionism. These are 2 themes that have run through my life and have been the source of some really serious struggle and an enormous number of gifts for me. So the question I'm going to pose before we start is, did you have to parent your parents? And what did that look like? And what impact did that have on you? And when I say impact, I'd like to encourage you to think really broadly. So often we think of these terms as a negative, a bad thing, and they can be extremely challenging. But I want to encourage you to think also about the gift that these 2 dynamics in your own life might have presented for you. Instead of being so hard on yourself, I think it can be helpful to look back on our lives and reflect on why we are who we are. Hopefully with the intent of extending ourselves some compassion, some understanding, and ultimately giving ourselves and others some grace in knowing what we really all have been through. When I take a look at my own childhood, perfectionism and early parentification seem to be some core themes that made me who I am. And these qualities have certainly led to lots of good things in my life. I learned to be very competent and independent and excel at a lot of things. I had high expectations for myself and others, and it allowed me to achieve a lot of important things in my life. It also has helped me in my parenting, being a very engaged parent, but also being really thoughtful about how I parent and what I ask of my children. But they were also the start of a lifetime of an enormous amount of pressure. And we're going to get to that in a few minutes. So, what are perfectionism and parentification? I think it might be helpful to just talk about these terms a little bit. If you're in therapy or you're into self-help, these words are probably very familiar to you, but it might be helpful to talk about them because I might be thinking about them a little differently than you are, and maybe we'll learn a little bit from each other in this conversation. I think parentification can best be described as an inappropriate level of responsibility placed on a child at an early age. It sometimes shows up as a role reversal where the child is made to feel that they have to care for their parents' needs. This might mean that you were tasked with things like grocery shopping, taking care of siblings, or taking on responsibilities that really were an adult's responsibilities. Or it could be at a more subtle level. It could be an emotional kind of caretaking. Maybe your parents are or were emotionally unregulated or dealing with a mental health challenge, and they leaned on you for just more support than you maybe were capable of giving while maintaining your own sense of self. When When parentification becomes a problem, it can cause you to abandon your own needs, deny your own emotions, and essentially become a parent to your parents. In later life, this can lead to a lot of struggle with setting boundaries. And for me, it was not having a very clear sense of who I was, what I wanted, and what I needed. You could become out of touch with your own emotions because you're so focused on the emotions of those around you. Some people become more of a people pleaser. And yes, a perfectionist. For me, perfectionism meant achieving consistently at a pace and a level that was nearly unattainable, and yet felt essential to my own survival and the survival of the adults around me. Growing up, I felt like my success was so important to my parents that I would deny my own needs, wants, desires in order to achieve that level of success for them. And nothing was good enough. For me, perfectionism was an A+ effort at all things. And anything less than that, I would probably have considered a failure. As I was thinking about this episode, a couple days ago, it really occurred to me that we've really assigned a completely negative frame to the word parentification. But as all things, there is a nuanced interpretation available to us here. And when I think about my relationship with my parents, it is rooted and grounded in deep love. My mom's voice was the first voice I heard, right? Her arms around me were the first arms around me. I was in love with her as a little child. And I wanted to care for her. I felt cared for, and I wanted to show her love in the same way I was experiencing it. And that's a beautiful thing, my desire to care for her. And as she's aged, I still want to take care of her and help her and support her in any way I can. For me, the challenge and what I want you to consider is the gray areas of these themes, the in-between. And that's kind of difficult to do sometimes. I mean, we really long for things in life to be black and white and super simple. It's right, it's wrong. Well, I'm going to throw a lot of stuff at you that is neither right nor wrong. It's complicated. It's messy. And in my experience, love is messy. And if we can embrace the mess, I think we are able to see both the challenge and the gift, that which we need to heal and that which we need to hold on to. And so as you listen to my story, and it's just one story, there are millions of stories about kids growing up feeling too much responsibility. As you hear mine, I want you to ponder and reflect on yours and think about what it is you feel like you need to let go of and what you want to hold on to. If anything I just explained resonates or rings true in your experience, then I hope my story can help you feel a little less alone and also help you navigate your own journey back to your most authentic self.
My name is Sarah Margaret Schmidt, and we are here in the North Woods of Wisconsin along the banks of the stunning Lake I was born in Wisconsin, not here, but about 180 miles south of here. And this place, this area, was just ridiculously special to us and a huge part of my growing up. Everything we did was really focused around being a family in a small town. Life was just extremely simple. We went to Catholic school and we went to church on Sunday, and I lived in a little duplex with my mom and my dad across from our church. When I was about 2-ish, we moved from our little house into the country, 2 miles out of town. And we lived on 5 acres that was just set in the middle of cornfields. And there was like one other house next to us, and then just space like everywhere. Our neighbors were awesome, and luckily we liked them because those were our friends to play with. We would spend our summer days and after school, even just running and playing in the fields. In the winter, there'd be this little creek that would flood, and we would try to ice skate on it. And then in the summer, you would walk to the woods and, pretend. We pretended we were like prairie girls, like Little House on the Prairie. Just did like the most simple things. Dug holes and learned how to shoot BB guns. My mom would send us out after breakfast, and sometimes we would eat lunch in the garden, from whatever was ripe. And sometimes we would come in the house for lunch, but then it would be right back out again, and you would hear a bell ring when it was time for dinner, and you just stayed busy outside, just like in this world of sort of make-believe. I think I first started really feeling pressure to be or do around like second grade. When I think about the memory, it kind of coincides with this sacrament that, Catholics do, which is like First Communion. And I remember the book we got, you had to color all the pictures, and how you colored it was important, and you were going to present it to the priest. And I think it was the first time I felt like something I was doing was for somebody else in a pretty significant way. And it just all felt very important and kind of weighty. And yet the sacrament itself made little sense to me as a kid. And so there was a lack of connection between what we were doing and why. I prided myself in being a helper. I just wanted to be perceived as a helpful, good little girl. And I was very, very good at that. At a very young age, I was doing my laundry, and I was cooking. I loved to cook for my family. I loved being in charge of cleaning a space. I used to rearrange the furniture for her just to surprise her. I loved to work alongside my parents, so that was tending the garden or mowing the lawn or raking leaves, or I genuinely cleaning the garage, washing a car. I don't really remember resenting those things really at all until I was much older, that I just wanted them to see me as this very capable, helpful, good kid. Our move, just 2 miles, was a big move. We moved from being in town to being completely isolated. And this wasn't a time when women had help. So, and we moved into a bigger house. And it was all really on her to clean and keep up. And I grew up in a family where appearances were important. So I think she felt a lot of pressure to be, a really good wife, a really good mother. And she was really good at both of those things. But I think the pressure she felt created a level of difficulty that I don't know if anybody could achieve it, the level of perfection I think she was aiming for. And so in that effort, I think she felt really isolated. And I think she was really lonely. Raising little kids is really hard. And she had 3 kids under 4 and at one point, and that's a lot. And she did it alone because my dad left early in the morning for work, and he came home in the evening, and he actually came home for lunch almost every day of my childhood because work was so close. And so she would make him lunch, and she would make us dinner. And, it was her job to make sure we were doing our homework and practicing piano. And he would be out, taking care of our house and the land and the yard. And The division of labor was so clear and dramatic that a lot fell on her. I mean, he felt a lot of pressure too, so I don't think that really eased much because he had his own set of pressures to perform and be and do in a pretty competitive environment, with his brothers and in a community that I think he felt expected a lot of him. So I think they were really burdened by that. And as a kid who was pretty sensitive, I perceived that. I could feel it. And so I took my helper parts and I tried to just put them into overdrive in like helping them feel better about themselves. And I learned at a very young age that if I could make them happy, I could make them seem happy, right? I could like bring smiles to their faces if I just did all these things that they could be proud of. I don't think my parents knew that I was trying to make them happy. I do not think that they saw that clearly, because I really believe that if they had, they would have been like, whoa, we have something going on here that maybe is not exactly right. Any parent, I think, who would see their kid striving so hard for their own, joy is, I think, something that a parent would be like, oh, this is a little out of kilter. We should probably check this. So in the town that I grew up in, you had like two options for school. You could go Catholic or public. My parents chose the Catholic school for us. It was a small little church school. And from 1st through 8th grade, there were 17 or 18 kids in the class. There were 6 girls and 12 boys in my class. We spent every day of those 8 years together. When I was in 8th grade, I started to realize and feel very strongly that I did not want to go on to the public high school in my town. And my whole motivation and my whole desire around that was really just meeting and being part of a larger community of students. I just felt really stuck and kind of smothered in such a small environment, and I wanted a bigger world. They gave in. And I went to a Catholic high school about 8 or 9 miles away from our house. It felt like a real fresh start for me, just a different experience of feeling like I was kind of getting away from home. I loved school more than anything else. I was the kid that for the 3 weeks before school started, I would be packing and repacking and organizing and sorting all of my school supplies and laying out the outfit for the first day and trying it on and then wearing it with the backpack and then taking it off and then hanging it carefully in my closet. And I had teachers who I hung on their every word. I loved homework. I loved raising my hand because I knew the answer. I loved doing research projects. I loved writing papers. I was really a dork in that regard. I mean, I think I annoyed the heck out of a lot of my classmates because who wants to be with that kid who is so into school? I mean, I think I was probably very annoying. I just loved to follow the rules. I loved knowing what the rules were. I felt like a little bit of an outsider. I don't think that was the common experience. And as I got older, I just didn't feel like I had a peer group that shared that same love of learning. And now I didn't name it as that because I don't think I realized that in 8th grade, but I did feel other, like I didn't fit in. I mean, I was, for the longest time, I think till 7th grade, I was probably one of the tallest kids in the class. And then I had this flaming red hair. I had an opinion about everything. I was smart, and studious and I think annoying probably, as a classmate. When I arrived at high school, I wanted so badly to feel like I was part of this new place. And the teenagers at that time would connect were ways that I just would never have been comfortable doing. I wasn't somebody who drank. I didn't smoke. I didn't like being up late. I was the kind of kid that I always got up early in the morning and I always was tired at night. I just wasn't there wasn't a partier in me. The social scene was really hard for me. I just didn't feel like I fit in. And so I made a really big effort to just be involved in all the things that I could be that did feel somewhat comfortable, and some that didn't. I mean, I was a cheerleader, which is, I think, hilarious when I think back on it now. And I pretty much hated almost every day of cheerleading, but I did it for 3 years. I tried really hard to fit in, but I really didn't. I mean, it wasn't that I was a bad cheerleader. I just didn't really fit the bill. I mean, I wasn't overweight, but I wasn't super skinny. I was very self-conscious, but I kept doing it. Just because I think I wanted to fit in somehow. But then I also did a lot of things that were very different. I loved writing for the newspaper. I loved being involved in like the yearbook and student government. So even though I felt awkward and not a part of things, I actually surprisingly got very involved in a lot of things in high school. Like if you look in the yearbook, where the people list like what did they do? My paragraph was pretty thick. My parents definitely saw all of my effort. There were a lot of days when my dad came home from work and he was really, really unhappy. I think that like professionally, he really struggled in his role, and he worked with his brothers. He struggled with his relationship with them. I think he felt like he had to prove himself and could never live up to their expectations, and was, disappointing on a lot of levels. And so his days were hard. They were also made hard by just, kind of who he was and his personality. He came home pretty grumpy almost every day. And I figured out like really quickly as a little kid that I could meet him at the door with big stories about all the things that I had done and accomplished and how great my day was. And I could really light him up with stories of my personal like achievements and the things I was doing. And I think a lot of my effort was geared toward having those things to tell him. I learned like really young that, he was sort of living vicariously through me. And when I had something joyful to share, he was happy. So I wanted him to be happy. I pushed myself and probably did a lot of things that I maybe wouldn't have chosen to do because I knew they were going to really light them up. My whole self was focused on others. It was all about what I could do to make everyone around me happier, feel better, feel more fulfilled, live their best life. It was such an external way of living, an external focus. If someone at the time had asked me, like, what is your favorite? I think it would have been hard for me to answer the question because I was so not tuned in to my own sense of joy or satisfaction or my own interests, my own passions. Everything was so tied for me to how other people would perceive things or experience them or appreciate them. And I lived that way for a really, really, really long time. I think I felt like I was keeping things together. I think a lot of my actions were driven to like, if I make my dad happier, then my mom will be happier. And then if she's happier, then it'll be easier for her to do the things that she needs to do. And then maybe she won't have the headaches that she gets all the time. Or maybe she will smile more. Or maybe then he will want to play with us. None of that was conscious, but I think that a lot of my activity was driven toward, I will do things to create this harmonious family. I will do my everything to be the family that we're all trying to be, but everybody's struggling to achieve. It was a ridiculously lonely experience because constant attention to other leaves you feeling so empty inside. And there were a lot of moments of joy in my childhood, for sure, and a lot of fun things that we did. But this was like an underlying current all the time, or like a rain cloud that just kind of hovers like off to the side, that just kind of follows you. And that's probably the pressure piece that mixed with this deep sense of loneliness. I also knew in our family that education was extremely important. And so going to college was like a really significant goal, and not just going to any college, but a really good school and getting a really good education was really emphasized from a really young age. I was going to get into the best school I could. I was going to take advantage of my education. I was going to do something really meaningful, and I was going to change the world. And I was going to really impress my family and make them really proud. And when it came time to like applying to schools, we didn't, the University of Wisconsin system was like it's where everybody went. They picked one of those schools or the private schools in the area. And I made it clear, to my guidance counselor that I wanted to leave the state for college. And he basically said, I can't help you. My mom didn't know anything about college applications, and my dad hadn't gone to college. And I did it on my own. I applied to Notre Dame. I applied to Northwestern because a girl who was a year ahead of me, I really admired, went to Northwestern. So I figured it must be a great school. Then I applied to Boston College because I had a cousin who went there. In the end, I looked at where I was admitted. I remember taking a trip with my mom. We visited Boston College on a beautiful day, and I thought, gosh, Boston is really far away. And then on the way back, we landed in Chicago. It was a rainy April day, like a couple days before the deadline that you had to make your decision. And we went to look at Northwestern. I remember asking a cousin of mine who I admired. I said, I don't know what to do. I have these two schools. He said, if you want to have fun, go to Boston College. If you want to get a good education, go to Northwestern. So I picked Northwestern. And a few months later, I was packing up and heading off to school. And now I think about it because I've done the drive between my hometown and Northwestern University like probably 300 times. And it's like this. But then it just felt like I could have been going to London. It felt that far away. It was a huge transition. I spent the first at least year, maybe more, just trying to figure out why I got in. And it's just really feeling like there was a big mistake made. Because I'd never been around such an incredibly high achieving, intense group of people. And I felt like a fish out of water. I was also in an incredibly diverse city. I'd never lived in a city that diverse. I chose to live in a dorm that was geared toward international studies. Funny story, I didn't actually want to study international studies, but I did want to live in that dorm because it had movable furniture and carpeting. There was a woman from Turkey and Hong Kong and Singapore and Istanbul. And then like 3 of us from the US. It just was such a huge change on every level. Navigating that giant campus, really being away from home, huge lecture classes. My first class at Northwestern, there were 300 of us in an auditorium for an Econ 101 class that was taught by Socratic method. And it scared the shit out of me. I had this experience when I would participate in different activities. Like I remember going out for softball. I remember playing tennis. I remember being on the court. And I would see people, my peers, participating in ways where they were just fully engaged in the activity that they were doing, whether it was tennis or whatever, softball, whatever it was. And they would just look like their whole being was there and present, and they were just alive in a way that I could never connect with. Because in my own mind, everything I did was for this other purpose that had nothing to do with my own sense of satisfaction. It was about, okay, if I do this right, then I can, I can impress or like share this, or I can translate this story. I can win this for them. I can achieve this for someone else. And it kept this distance in me from nearly everything I did. And then the experiences where I did do something and I would be caught off guard when I would drop in and all of a sudden touch that place in me. It would be terrifying. And it would be just very scary, because I don't think I thought I could do both. I couldn't both pursue my own passions and
I just couldn't do both. So I had to make a choice. So there was always about a distinct choice. And I think I got to Northwestern and I realized I had chosen me. I floundered. I just didn't know what to do. I remember calling home almost every day to check in on them. I think my mom thought I needed to talk to her, but I think I also just needed to hear her voice and know she was okay. You know, and I think I tried from 180 miles to take care of everybody. And I just perpetuated that distance because if you're doing that, you can't the college experience is like, immerse yourself. But I couldn't. I just couldn't. It was the stakes felt too high. It felt too scary. I think at that point I had lived so much of my time not immersed in me that I didn't know how to be connected in that way. I really struggled my first quarter. I remember I plagiarized a paper for my German literature class because I was so over my head. I couldn't understand what the text was that we were reading. It was so hard. And we had to write a paper in German, and I froze. And I remember just copying phrases into this paper, and I knew what I was doing, but I didn't know what else to do. And I had to turn in this paper, and I remember handing it in, and later the teacher called me and she's like, you realize this is plagiarism. I was like, yeah. She gave me a chance to rewrite it, and I did, and I eked out a C in that class, and it's the first C I ever got. It was really painful. I never took German literature again. But that was kind of my experience in all of my classes. I remember sitting with these books, these thick, this was when you actually bought textbooks, right? And they were like $85 a piece. It was hilarious. I remember reading the econ book, and I'd be sitting in the library, and I knew I was in the right place. I was in the library studying, and I was there at the right time. It was Sunday afternoon, and that's when everybody studied. And I'd be sitting in a carrel, and it was like the best place to choose to study. And yet I'd be reading this stuff, and nothing was sinking in. I could read it over and over and over again, and I was like, nothing penetrated. And I don't know what I was thinking about, but that was my first year of college, like the whole year of just going through the motions and hoping that it was all going to be okay. But not even feeling like I could tell somebody that it was hard. I didn't feel like I could say it. I just didn't. I felt like it'd be such a disappointment. It was so expensive. There was so much at stake. I could not fail. So I just kind of kept my nose down, kept my like nose to the grindstone, sort of, so to speak. And I just thought, God, if I just try harder, like this will work. But then you have to pick a major. And there were a lot of students that I knew that were choosing, like, I'm pre-med because my parents want me to be a doctor. That was like a lot of that, So I wasn't alone in this, but we didn't really talk about it either. But if we had gone out for a coffee and just talked about how much pressure we felt, I think we all would have been so relieved. And we all would have said the same fucking thing, I'm exhausted. I am lost. This is hard. I don't feel like I belong here. Why did I get in here? There must have been a big mistake, all of that stuff. But nobody said that. We were all doing it, I think. That's kind of the tragic part of it, really, is that we were all like just marching in this line, towards something that we were told we were supposed to achieve. And so then when it came time to picking a major, the question is, what do you want to study? Well, what do you want to study, Sarah? I remember thinking, well, I should probably be an accountant because that would be the most useful thing. My dad had always told us that, the accountants were like the backbone of the business. Well, I hated math. I was good at it, but I didn't like it. And there's no accounting major at Northwestern, so I was off the hook on that one. So I tried everything. I probably declared 7 different majors. I switched schools twice, within the university. I was just lost. I could not connect with what I really wanted to study. This family that I grew up in was it was a high performance culture. That sounds very businessy, but we owned a business.
And that pressure to work hard and produce and be engaged and like do something meaningful and make a difference in the world. I mean, that was just like in our DNA. And it was in like little ways and big ways. And I felt very much like I was kind of carrying all of that on my back when I left for school. I was one of the first in my family to leave the state of Wisconsin for school. I'll never forget. I mean, I went to say goodbye to my grandmother. She was in her 80s at the time. I went to say goodbye. I told her where I was going. She had actually lived in Chicago for a while. And so I thought she was going to really like this, that I was going to Chicago. I told her where I was going, and she said to me, "What on earth could you possibly need in Chicago that you can't find here?" And I remember saying to her, "I'd like to see some buildings that are more than 3 stories tall." And, she didn't really think that was funny, and I knew it wasn't actually, but I could not fail, right? I mean, like, I could not and say, like, I can't do this. You're right. The big city's too much for me, or like, this environment's too competitive, or, all of those things would have been true. I know that for that period of time, I was like running on adrenaline. I had that I drank too much coffee and didn't eat enough kind of feeling in me all the time. This jittery angst that just buzzed in my whole body. And it was so distracting, really just like day and night. Woke up with it, went to bed with it. So I was overwhelmed. And that fall, I was sick a lot. I got mono. I had a lot of repeated just like strep throat, and then I got an ear infection, and I just had all these like little things going on. And student health services are really good with mono. But I wasn't getting better. And then right before the winter break, I remember going again. I forget what else I had, something else. I had some other infection or cold and for some reason, I don't know if there's a surgeon that was doing rounds or something at the student health service, and he came in to look at my neck. I think he knew right then and there what I had. I really hope that listening to me tell my story has been helpful to you, as I've been working on being the best possible parent I can be to the 5 amazing humans that I've been involved in parenting in my life. I've had many, many, many opportunities to reflect on these 2 themes and how my own struggle with them might be transmuted to them. I think the most important thing for me has been awareness and creating opportunities in my life to pause and reflect. Examine my own behaviors, my attitudes, my opinions, even share some of that examination with them in appropriate ways. And in the pause, think about how I want to respond, how I want to react, how I want to engage, and how I want them to feel and see themselves in the world. I don't want anyone to think that I'm a perfect parent. My kids, we could line them up and they could share with you lots of stories about how not perfect I am. And I'm really proud of that, because my goal as a mom isn't to be perfect. My goal as a human is no longer to be perfect. I'm really just trying to be good enough. Good enough for them and good enough for me. Good enough for the world. I learned a long time ago that no one really notices the difference between my A+ effort and my B- effort. And that my B- effort is good enough. And when I give that amount of effort, I still save a little energy, a little joy, a little piece of me for me. And I save it for what's ever next, what's ever needed next.
So when I think about the term good enough and what it means to me right now, it really means being able to sit with the discomfort inherent in maybe not pleasing everyone. Maybe not being all things to all people all the time. Michael Easter wrote the terrific book, The Comfort Crisis. And for me, some of this is learning to just sit in the discomfort of knowing I will ultimately disappoint people and being really okay with that. I can't wait to share more with you. And really, I can't wait to hear what these ideas and these stories trigger for you and how we can learn together. If any of this resonated for you, we would love for you to join our community. Subscribe or follow us wherever you listen to podcasts, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and follow us on Instagram to continue the conversation at Wholey Schmidt. That's WHOLEY.